The blood was black against the snow. Tom Sullivan knelt on frozen concrete, his arms wrapped around Sergeant's collapsing body. The German shepherd's breathing came in wet, rattling gasps. Around them, a crowd pressed closer, phone cameras flashing, voices shouting over each other, "Call 911. The dog's dying. That man's a monster. 3 meters away." Richard Montgomery stood paralyzed beside his Bentley, his face drained of color. His $1,000 shoes were flecked with slush. Eleanor Baker, 70 years old, clutched a battered guitar to her chest, carved into the wood. David Sullivan, 1989. A young woman on crutches pushed through the crowd, scarred face twisted with fury. "How could you, Dad?" Tom looked up at the falling snow, his lips moving soundlessly. Then the world began to spin backward. 32 years dissolved into white. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. Boston Latin School, 1993. The locker room smelled of sweat and cheap cologne. Tom Sullivan stood at 18 with shoulders already broadened by summer construction work. His lettered jacket hung on a hook behind him. He was wiping blood from his knuckles when Richard Montgomery stumbled through the door, glasses cracked, lips split open. 3 seniors had cornered Richard in the bathroom. Tom had heard the laughter, the sound of fists on flesh. He'd found Richard curled on the tile floor while his attackers stood over him, still laughing. Tom hadn't asked questions. He'd simply stepped between them. Now, Richard slumped against the lockers, tears mixing with blood on his pale face. "You didn't have to do that," he whispered. "They'll come after you now." Tom shrugged, wrapping his hand in a towel. "Let them try." "Why?" Richard's voice cracked. "We barely know each other." "Because nobody deserves that." Tom met his eyes. "That's what friends do, Richie." Richard stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll never forget this, Tom, never." They graduated 3 months later. The ceremony took place on a June afternoon so bright it hurt to look at the sky. Afterward, families gathered on the lawn for photographs. Tom's parents had already left for the airport. His father's business trip couldn't wait. Richard's family surrounded him, mother, father, younger sister, all dressed like they were attending a wedding. Richard found Tom sitting alone under an oak tree, still wearing his cap and gown. "So you're really doing it?" Richard asked. "Marines ship out in 2 weeks." Tom pulled an envelope from his pocket, his enlistment papers. Richard sat down beside him. "I got into MIT, computer science." "That's perfect for you." "You're going to change the world, Richie." "Maybe." Richard reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. From it, he withdrew a gold coin, old and heavy, inscribed with words too worn to read clearly. "My grandfather gave this to me before he died. He said to give it to someone worthy." Tom pushed his hand away gently. "Keep it. You'll need it more than me." "Tom, I'm serious. That's family history. You don't give that away." Richard nodded, slipping the coin back into his pocket. But later, when Tom hung his jacket in his locker one final time, he wouldn't notice the slight weight added to the inside pocket. The years blurred together after that. Tom served in places whose names he'd learned to hate. He rose through the ranks, earned commendations he never displayed, carried scars he never explained. In 2005, at a military hospital in Germany, he met Sarah Mitchell. She was a nurse with steady hands and eyes that understood things without needing words. They married that winter in a small church in Boston. Snow fell during the ceremony, covering the city in white. Afterward, they danced in the church parking lot to a hymn playing on someone's car radio, leaning on the everlasting arms. Sarah's breath fogged the cold air as she laughed. "Promise me you'll always come back to me." Tom held her closer. "I promise. Always." They never had children. Sarah said it was probably for the best, given how often Tom deployed, but they had each other, and somehow that felt complete. Tom would come home from months overseas to find Sarah had repainted the kitchen or planted new flowers in the garden. She'd make him coffee exactly how he liked it and sit with him in silence until the nightmares faded. On their 5th anniversary, Tom taught her to play guitar. She was terrible at it, fingers fumbling over the strings, but she laughed at her own mistakes. They'd sit on the back porch in summer evenings, Tom playing while Sarah sang off-key, the neighborhood dogs howling along. "We're disturbing the peace." Sarah giggled. "Good," Tom said. "Peace is overrated anyway." But peace was exactly what they had built together. A small house with a mortgage they could almost afford, jobs that paid enough, routines that felt like safety. Tom's nightmares grew less frequent. Sarah's smile came easier. Neither of them knew how fragile it all was, how quickly everything could shatter, how the warmth they'd built could be stripped away by forces they couldn't see coming. On Tom's final deployment before retirement, as he boarded the transport plane to Afghanistan, Sarah stood on the tarmac in her nurse's uniform. The wind whipped her hair across her face. "Come back to me," she called over the engine noise. Tom smiled, touching 2 fingers to his heart, then pointing at her. "Their private signal. Always," he mouthed. The plane's door closed. Sarah watched until it disappeared into the clouds, one hand pressed against her chest, unaware that she was already sick, that the cancer cells were multiplying silently inside her, that the insurance company Tom trusted would soon have a new owner, that the promise Tom had just made would become the hardest one he'd ever tried to keep. Afghanistan, 2010. The heat hit like a physical blow. Even at dawn, Tom Sullivan, 47 years old and counting days until retirement, stood in the compound yard watching a German shepherd work the perimeter. The dog moved with purpose, nose tracking invisible trails, tail held straight and alert. "That's Sergeant," said the young soldier beside him. "David Sullivan, no relation, though they'd joked about it. 25 years old, fresh-faced despite 6 months in country. Best nose in the unit, saved 7 lives last month." Tom watched the dog pause, sniff, then sit the signal for explosives detected. David jogged over, checked the location, radioed it in. The controlled detonation came 10 minutes later, rattling windows a quarter-mile away. 7 lives, Tom repeated. "Would have been 8, but I don't count myself." David grinned, rubbing Sergeant's ears. The dog leaned into his touch, eyes half closed with pleasure. "He's getting old, though. Command wants to retire him when we ship out next month." Something in David's voice made Tom look closer. "Retire him how?" David's smile faded the bad way. "Says he's too stressed to rehome, too expensive to keep. I tried to fight it, but—" He shrugged, helplessly. Tom felt something cold settle in his chest. He looked at Sargent, who was now sitting at attention, watching them both with intelligent brown eyes. "That's not right." "No, sir, it's not. But I'm just a specialist. Nobody listens to me." 3 weeks later, the world exploded. Tom remembered fragments, the marketplace, of the crowd, David laughing at something stupid. Then the sound, not the explosion itself, but the absence of sound afterward, ears ringing in a vacuum of silence. Smoke, screaming, blood on his hands. He found David in the rubble, legs twisted wrong, blood spreading across his uniform in a dark stain. Sargent was already there, paws on David's chest, barking frantically for help that wouldn't arrive in time. Tom dropped to his knees, cradling David's head. "Medic, I need a medic." But they both knew. David's breath came in short, wet gasps. His hand fumbled for something on his vest, a guitar pick on a chain. No, not a pick, a small harmonica, battered and worn. "My guitar," David whispered. Blood flecked his lips. "In my locker. Take it. You're going to need it yourself. Hold on, kid. Please." David's fingers found Tom's arm, surprisingly strong. "Give it to my mom, Eleanor Baker, Boston. Tell her," he coughed, body convulsing, "tell her I was brave." "You are brave. You're the bravest. Tell her." David's eyes locked on Tom's. "Promise me." "I promise." Yet David's gaze shifted to Sargent, who had stopped barking and was now whining softly, licking David's face. "Take care of him. Don't let them put him down like he's nothing. He's a hero. David, promise me." Tom's throat tightened. "I promise." David smiled then, blood on his teeth. He whispered something that might have been Mom, or might have been home. Then his hand went slack in Tom's. Sargent howled. It was a sound Tom had never heard a dog make before, grief distilled into pure animal anguish. The dog refused to leave David's body. Tom had to physically drag him away when the cleanup crew arrived. That night, Tom made his decision. He found Sargent in the kennel, isolated from the other dogs, lying motionless in the corner. The paperwork was already filed. Retirement scheduled for the following week. Tom picked the lock. It wasn't difficult. He'd learned things during 20 years of service. Sargent looked up at him with dull eyes. "Come on, boy," Tom whispered. "We're going home." Getting the dog out of Afghanistan required favors, forged documents, and a cargo crate labeled equipment. Tom used every connection he had, called in every debt. He didn't care about the consequences. He'd made a promise to a dying kid. The consequences came anyway. Court-martial charges, theft of military property, dishonorable discharge reduced to general discharge only because of Tom's service record. But the real punishment was the loss of his veterans' benefits. No military pension, no full health care, nothing. Tom arrived home to find Sarah waiting at the airport. With Sargent's paperwork, she'd known what he was going to do before he did it. She took one look at the dog, still traumatized and grieving, and said simply, "He's family now." For 6 months, things were almost okay. Tom found work as a security guard. Sarah's nursing job covered most of the bills. Sargent slowly came back to himself, learning to trust again, to play, to be a dog instead of a weapon. Then Sarah started getting sick. At first, she blamed exhaustion. Then the pain started sharp. stabbing, relentless. The diagnosis came quick and brutal. Stage 4 ovarian cancer. Aggressive, inoperable. The doctor said chemotherapy might buy her time. Might. Tom's new job had basic insurance, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. He sold the house, borrowed from friends, applied for medical assistance and was denied, applied again and was denied again. Sarah's insurance company was called Montgomery Health Solutions, LLC. Tom didn't recognize the name. The denial letters were signed by various administrators, none named Montgomery, just bureaucratic rejections, not medically necessary. Experimental treatment, out of network? Tom appealed and appealed and appealed. Sarah deteriorated in their rented apartment, while Tom fought with insurance companies by day and held her hand through the pain at night. Sargent never left her side, lying beside the bed, resting his head on the mattress where Sarah could touch him. One evening, Sarah asked Tom to record her on his phone. Her voice was thin, barely above a whisper. "Tom, honey, if I'm gone, sing our song whenever you're scared." She smiled weakly. "And take care of Sargent. He'll take care of you." She sang then, voice cracking. Leaning, safe and secure from all alarms." She died 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning in March. Tom was holding her left hand. Sargent's head rested on her right. Tom didn't discover the video in his phone until the funeral was over and the apartment was empty, except for him, Sargent, and the crushing weight of everything he'd lost. He played it once. Then he couldn't bring himself to play it again. But he couldn't delete it either. The phone battery read 98%. Tom made a promise to himself: keep the phone charged, always, because that video was all he had left of Sarah's voice. That and a dog who'd lost as much as he had. 18 months later, Tom Sullivan understood what rock bottom actually meant. It wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment of collapse. It was gradual, like falling asleep you didn't notice until you were already gone. The apartment went first, then the car, then his dignity. Piece by piece, until he found himself in Copley Square with a cardboard sign and David's guitar. Winter in Boston was merciless, the kind of cold that didn't just chill it, invaded, colonizing your bones until you forgot what warmth felt like. Tom had a sleeping bag rated for 30 degrees. Most nights dropped below 0. He kept Sargent close. The German Shepherd's double coat was built for cold, but even he struggled. Tom could see it in the way the dog moved, slower each morning, his breath coming in labored clouds. They had a routine. Mornings, Tom played guitar while commuters rushed past. The case open, a few dollars, scattered in. To suggest others had already given. Most people looked away. Some dropped coins without breaking stride. A rare few stopped to listen. Tom played the old hymns Sarah had loved. His fingers were too cold to play well, the strings biting into calloused flesh, but he played anyway. Sargent sat beside him, patient as stone. By noon, if they were lucky, they'd have enough for food. Tom always fed Sargent first. He'd walk 3 blocks to the dollar store, buy the cheapest dog food available, and watch Sargent eat before allowing himself a granola bar or instant noodles prepared with hot water from a gas station bathroom. Afternoons were for survival, finding a warm place to sit for a few hours. Library, hospital waiting room, mall, anywhere security wouldn't immediately kick them out. Tom had learned which guards had sympathy and which had quotas to fill. Sargent had become more than a companion. He was a therapy dog in the truest sense, though Tom had no official paperwork to prove it. When the nightmares came, and they came often, dragging Tom back to Afghan marketplaces in David's blood-soaked uniform, Sergeant would press his weight against Tom's chest. The dog's warmth, his steady breathing, the physical reality of him, pulled Tom back from the edge. "Good boy," Tom would whisper into Sergeant's fur. "Good boy. I'm okay. We're okay." But they weren't okay. Tom noticed it first in December. Sergeant's breathing had changed, sometimes catching, a slight wheeze that hadn't been there before. Then came the coughing, dry at first, then wet, productive. Tom told himself it was just the cold. Dogs got colds too. By January, he couldn't pretend anymore. He found a free veterinary clinic in Dorchester. Took 2 buses to get there. The waiting room was full of people like him, choosing between feeding their families and treating their pets. The math of poverty written on every face. Patricia White was in her 50s. Gray hair pulled back, eyes kind but tired. She examined Sergeant thoroughly, while Tom stood with his hands clenched, preparing himself for bad news. "How long has he been coughing?" Dwight asked. "Month, maybe 6 weeks." She pressed her stethoscope against Sergeant's ribs, listening. Her expression didn't change, but Tom saw something flicker in her eyes. "I need to take an X-ray." 20 minutes later, Dr. White returned with films she clipped to a lightbox. Tom didn't need medical training to see it, a dark mass in Sergeant's chest, roughly the size of a tennis ball. "Lung tumor," Dwight said quietly. "I'd need a biopsy to confirm, but given his age and symptoms, I'm fairly certain it's malignant." The floor seemed to tilt. Tom gripped the examination table. What are his options? Surgery, followed by the chemotherapy. There's a specialist in Cambridge who's had success with cases like this. She paused. The surgery alone would be around $200,000. With chemo and follow-up care, closer to $200,000 to $50,000. Tom laughed. It came out harsh, almost a sob. "I have $47. Dr. White's face softened. "I'm so sorry. Without treatment. He has maybe 3 to 4 months. I can prescribe pain medication to keep him comfortable. How much? The medication I can give you samples, enough for a few weeks." And after that, she didn't answer. She didn't need to. Tom looked at Sergeant, who sat patiently on the exam table, tail wagging slightly because Tom was looking at him. The dog didn't understand he was dying. He just knew his person was here, and that was enough. "I can't," Tom's voice broke. He tried again. "I can't let him down. He saved my life more than once. I can't just let him die." "I understand. But, Mr. Sullivan, without insurance, without income, there's no bank that would give you a loan for a dog surgery. I wish I had better news." Tom carried Sergeant out of the clinic, the dog's weight familiar in his arms. Outside, snow had begun to fall. Tom sat on the curb, Sergeant in his lap, both of them shaking, Tom from grief, Sergeant from cold. "I'm sorry, boy," Tom whispered. "I'm so sorry. I promised David I'd take care of you. I promised." Sergeant licked his face, tail still wagging weakly. That night, in their cardboard shelter in an alley off Boylston Street, Tom held Sergeant close. He could feel every rib, every bone, could hear the labored breathing. The dog had lost weight, his coat dull, eyes clouded with discomfort he'd never complained about. Tom pulled out his phone, 4% battery. He'd been rationing it, no money for charging at cafes anymore. But he needed to hear Sarah's voice. He played the video. Sarah's thin, tired voice filled the tiny speaker. "Take care of Sergeant. He'll take care of you." The video ended. 3% battery. Tom looked at the dog dying slowly in his arms. Looked at the phone that held his wife's last words. Looked at the guitar that had belonged to a kid who died in his arms. Everyone he'd ever loved was dead or dying, and he was powerless to stop any of it. Sergeant shifted, placed his paw on Tom's chest, the pressure point he'd been trained to use during Tom's panic attacks. Even now, even sick and in pain, the dog was trying to take care of him. "What am I going to do without you?" Tom asked the falling snow. The snow didn't answer. It never did. The temperature had dropped to 8 below zero when the Bentley pulled up to the curb. Tom didn't notice at first. He was focused on keeping his fingers moving across the guitar strings, even though he'd lost feeling in them an hour ago. Sergeant lay curled against his leg, shivering despite his thick coat. Each breath the dog took seemed to require effort. Tom had counted their money 3 times. $32. Enough for dog food and maybe some medication samples if Dwight's office had any left. Not enough for anything that mattered. The car door opened. Expensive shoes stepped onto salted pavement leather wingtips that probably cost more than Tom had earned in the last 6 months. Tom didn't look up. Rich people stepping over homeless veterans was nothing new, but the shoes stopped. Tom Sullivan. That voice, Tom's fingers stilled on the strings. He looked up slowly. Richard Montgomery stood 3 feet away, wrapped in a cashmere overcoat that cost more than most people's rent. 32 years had been kind to him, hair graying at the temples in that distinguished way, skin healthy, well-fed, success worn like cologne. "Is that really you?" Richard's voice carried something between shock and fascination. Tom set the guitar down carefully. "Richard, my God, what happened to you?" Richard's eyes traveled over Tom's worn jacket, the cardboard behind him, the sleeping bag. His gaze landed on Sergeant. "And you have a dog." "Yeah." Tom's hand moved protectively to Sergeant's head. The dog raised his muzzle, studying Richard with wary eyes. "I'm actually glad I ran into you." Richard glanced toward the Fairmont Copley Plaza across the street, where valets were helping elegantly dressed people from cars. "I'm heading to charity gala. Big donors, foundation board members, important people." Tom said nothing. "I'd love to help you out." Richard pulled out his wallet, made a show of thumbing through bills. "How about this? I'll give you $500 right now. That should get you back on your feet, right? $500. Tom's mind raced. That would cover Sergeant's pain medication for months. Food, maybe a week in a cheap motel to get out of the cold. "What's the catch?" Richard smiled. "Just a small favor. See? These gala events can be so stuffy. I thought it might be nice to have some entertainment. You obviously play guitar. Sing us a song right here, where my guests can hear you as they arrive." Tom's stomach turned. "You want me to perform for you?" "For them, for everyone. Think of it as busking, but with a guaranteed payout." Richard's smile widened. "And your dog can help. Dogs are great for fundraising. Make him do some tricks. Bark, roll over, play dead. People eat that up." The words hit like a fist. Tom stood slowly, legs unsteady from cold and malnutrition. "Get away from me!" $500, Tom, for 5 minutes of your time. Richard leaned closer, voice dropping. Or you can sit here in the cold and watch your dog die. Your choice. Sergeant coughed, then a wet, rattling sound that seemed to tear through his chest. The dog tried to stand, but his legs buckled. He went down hard on the ice. Sergeant! Tom dropped to his knees, gathering the dog into his arms. Sergeant's body felt too light, too fragile. His breathing came in short, painful gasps. Richard watched, unmoved. He doesn't look good. Veterinary bills are expensive, aren't they? $500 buys a lot of dog food, maybe even a vet visit. Tom looked up at him in the streetlight. Richard's face was all sharp angles and shadows. This wasn't the scared kid from the locker room. This was someone else entirely, someone who'd learned to take his pain and pass it on to others. Why? Tom's voice was barely a whisper. Why are you doing this? I'm offering to help an old friend. That's all. But Richard's eyes said something different. They said, I remember you saving me. I remember feeling small and weak. I remember owing you. And now I get to watch you be small instead. Tom looked down at Sergeant. The dog's eyes were half closed, chest heaving. How much longer did he have? Weeks days. Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. Take care of Sergeant. He'll take care of you. Tom thought about dignity, about pride, about all the things he'd already lost. What was one more? He thought about David dying in the dust, begging Tom to save his dog. He thought about promises, the ones he'd kept and the ones he'd failed. Sergeant's paw reached up, touched Tom's chest weakly, even now, sick and dying, trying to comfort him. Tom closed his eyes, opened them, met Richard's gaze. Okay. What was that? I said, okay, I'll do it. The words tasted like ash. But the money goes to him for his medication. Richard's smile was triumphant. Of course, that's what friends are for. He pulled out his phone, texted someone. My assistant will set everything up. Shouldn't take more than 15 minutes. You might want to tune that guitar. He walked away toward his car, leaving Tom kneeling in the snow with Sergeant in his arms. I'm sorry, Tom whispered to the dog. I'm so sorry. Sergeant licked his hand once. Forgiveness the dog always gave freely. Forgiveness Tom knew he didn't deserve. Richard's assistant arrived with a portable spotlight and a microphone stand, transforming the sidewalk into a stage. The young man, probably fresh out of business school, avoided Tom's eyes while he worked, positioning equipment with the efficiency of someone following orders they didn't question. Mr. Montgomery wants you center stage, he said, pointing to a spot directly in front of the hotel entrance. When the guests arrive, you'll be the first thing they see. Tom carried Sergeant to the designated spot. The dog's weight felt wrong in his arms, too light, bones too prominent. He set Sergeant down gently. The German shepherd sat, swaying slightly, but stayed upright. The spotlight clicked on, blindingly bright. Tom raised a hand to shield his eyes. Sound check, the assistant said, tapping the microphone. The feedback screech made Sergeant's ears flatten. You're live. Then he was gone, disappearing into the hotel. Tom stood alone in the circle of light. Around him, Boston continued its evening rhythm. Cars passing, people walking, the city indifferent to one more humiliation. But he wasn't thinking about the cities. He was thinking about the guitar in his hands, about the name carved into the wood where his thumb rested. David Sullivan, 1989, 2000. The first car arrived, a Tesla, silent and sleek. A couple emerged, the woman in a floor-length gown, the man in a tuxedo. They glanced at Tom, confused, then kept walking. More cars followed, more confused glances. Some people pulled out phones, not to record, but to check if this was some kind of performance art. Others simply looked away, embarrassed for him. Richard appeared at the hotel entrance, champagne flute in hand. Several well-dressed people gathered around him. He caught Tom's eye and raised his glass in a mock toast. Then he spoke loudly enough for Tom to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, a special performance from an old friend, a veteran who's fallen on hard times. Maybe we can help him tonight." The words were designed to wound, to reduce 20 years of service. Sarah's death, every sacrifice Tom had made, into a simple narrative fallen veteran, needs charity. It erased everything that mattered and left only the failure. Tom's hands tightened on the guitar. He could walk away, should walk away. But Sargent coughed again, the sound wet and labored, and Tom remembered the number Dr. White had given him, $250,000. 500 was nothing against that mountain, but it was something. It was food. It was medication. It was a few more weeks, maybe, of keeping his promise to David. He began to play. The opening notes of "Leaning on the Everlasting Arms" drifted into the cold air. His fingers fumbled at first, from cold, from shame, from the weight of too many losses. But muscle memory took over, the same way it had during firefights, when thinking would get you killed. Sargent, instead of performing tricks as Richard wanted, simply moved closer. The dog sat directly beside Tom, then did something he'd been trained to do for panic attacks. He lifted his front paw and placed it firmly on Tom's thigh. The pressure was grounding, real, a reminder that Tom wasn't alone. Tom's voice cracked on the first word. He cleared his throat, tried again. What a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. It was Sarah's song, their wedding song. The last song she'd sung to him from her hospital bed, voice thin as paper. Tom had played it at her funeral while Sargent sat beside the casket, refusing to leave even when the service ended. The crowd began to quiet. Not all of them, some still chatted, networking even during a street performance. But others stopped, listened. Tom sang about safety, about being kept by God's mighty power. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd kept no one safe, not David, not Sarah, not even the dog dying beside him. But he sang anyway, because that's what you did with hymns. You sang them when you believed them and when you didn't. You sang them especially when you didn't. Tears started running down his face. He couldn't stop them, didn't try. They fell onto the guitar, onto Sargent's fur, onto the frozen ground. Sargent never moved his paw from Tom's leg. The dog watched Tom's face with those brown eyes, and in them Tom saw something that shattered him pure, absolute loyalty. Sargent didn't care that they were homeless, didn't care that Tom couldn't afford surgery, didn't care about any of it. He cared only that Tom was here, now, and that was enough. Tom's voice broke completely on the last verse. He finished the song barely above a whisper. safe and secure from all alarms, leaning, leaning, leaning on the everlasting arms. Silence fell over the sidewalk. Tom lowered his head, unable to look at the crowd, unable to bear seeing their pity or their contempt, or whatever expression rich people wore when confronted with genuine suffering. Then someone started clapping, not polite charity applause, but real applause. Tom looked up. An elderly woman had stepped forward from the crowd. She was perhaps 70, wearing an elegant navy dress, pearls at her throat, but her face was wet with tears. She stared at Tom like she'd seen a ghost. "That guitar," she said, voice shaking. "Where did you get that guitar?" Tom looked down at the instrument in his hands. "It belonged to a soldier. He died in Afghanistan." The woman took another step closer, and Tom saw her eyes fixed on the side of the guitar where David had carved his name. Her hand went to her mouth. "David Sullivan," she whispered. "That was my son." The crowd went completely still. Even the street noise seemed to fade. Tom's heart stopped, then started again. "Too fast. Your son, he died in 2018 in Kabul. They sent his things home, but..." She broke off, sobbing. "They said his guitar was lost. I've been looking for it. I hired people to find it. I thought it was gone forever." His son stood on shaking legs, still holding the guitar. Sargent stood too, unsteady, but determined to stay close to Tom. "I was with him," Tom said quietly. "When he died, he gave me the guitar. He asked me to..." His voice failed. He tried again. "He asked me to tell you he was brave, Eleanor Baker." Because that's who she was, Eleanor Baker. The name David had whispered with his last breath closed the distance between them in 3 steps. She threw her arms around Tom, and he stood there, frozen. This stranger, who was no stranger, holding him while he finally broke. "Thank you," she sobbed into his shoulder. "Thank you for being with him. Thank you for keeping his guitar safe. Thank you." Tom couldn't speak, could only hold her while the crowd watched, and Richard's triumphant smile began to slip. Eleanor Baker pulled back from the embrace, hands still gripping Tom's shoulders. Her eyes searched his face with an intensity that felt like being seen for the first time in years. "Tell me everything," she said. "Please. They only sent me a letter. Official language. Nothing real." Tom's throat tightened around them. The crowd had formed a loose circle, phones out now, some recording. He caught glimpses of concerned faces, curious faces. Richard stood at the edge, champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. "He was helping clear a marketplace," Tom began, voice rough. "There was an explosion. I found him in the rubble. The memory crashed over him. Blood, smoke, David's hand gripping his arm. He was brave, ma'am, right to the end. He talked about you. He wanted you to know he wasn't afraid. What else?" Eleanor's voice was desperate. "What else did he say? He asked me to take care of his dog." Tom gestured to Sargent, who was sitting pressed against his leg. "This is Sargent. He was David's service dog, explosive detection. He saved 7 lives. Eleanor knelt slowly, joints protesting until she was eye level with Sargent. The dog studied her, then tentatively leaned forward and licked her hand. Eleanor's face crumpled. "David wrote about you," she whispered to Sargent. "He said you were his best friend." She looked back up at Tom. "He said they were going to put you down. He was fighting it, writing letters to senators, posting on social media. He was so worried about you." "Tom saved him," someone in the crowd said. "He must have saved the dog." Eleanor stood, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You took him. You brought him home." Tom nodded. "I couldn't let them. David asked me to protect him." "So I did." "And they punished you for it." It wasn't a question. Eleanor turned to address the crowd, voice carrying with unexpected strength. "This man saved my son's dog from being killed. He honored a dying soldier's last wish. And how was he repaid? Look at him. Look where he is." Murmurs rippled through the gathered people. Tom saw expressions changing, curiosity shifting to something harder. Anger, maybe, or shame. Eleanor pulled out her phone, fingers moving quickly. "Montgomery Health Solutions," she read aloud. "This is the insurance company that denied coverage, isn't it? The one listed on your wife's medical records?" Tom's blood went cold. "How do you—" "I've been following your story since David died. I hired investigators. I wanted to find you to thank you. But you vanished." Her eyes found Richard in the crowd. "Montgomery Health Solutions. Who owns that company?" Richard's face had gone pale. "There are hundreds of insurance companies. I can't possibly—" "Montgomery," Eleanor repeated, louder. "Isn't that your name?" She turned back to her phone, scrolling. Richard Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Health Solutions, LLC, acquired through merger in 2020. The same year. She looked at Tom. "The same year your wife died." The crowd's attention swung to Richard like a searchlight. He straightened, trying to maintain composure. "I oversee multiple companies. I don't personally review every insurance claim." "But you set the policies," Tom said quietly. The pieces were falling into place, each one heavier than the last. "You decide what gets covered, what gets denied. It's business. We have actuaries, data analysts. My wife died because your company said her treatment wasn't medically necessary." Tom's voice was steady, but everyone heard the rage underneath, cold and controlled. "She was 38 years old. We had 17 years together, and your company decided those years weren't worth the cost." Richard's mouth opened, closed. "I didn't know. You have to believe me. I didn't know it was your wife." Would it have mattered? The question came from a man in the crowd, older, wearing a tuxedo. If it wasn't his wife, would that have made it acceptable? Richard turned to the man, someone important. Judging by how Richard's expression flickered with panic, "Senator, I can explain." "I'd like to hear this explanation," the senator said coldly. But before Richard could speak, a new voice cut through the tension. "Dad." Everyone turned. A young woman stood at the edge of the crowd, supported by four-armed crutches. She wore jeans and a heavy jacket, face marked with scars that ran from her left temple down to her jaw. One leg was clearly prosthetic. Tom could see where the pants didn't quite hang right. "Ashley," Richard's voice cracked, "what are you doing here? You should be home." "I saw the live stream." Ashley moved forward, each step deliberate and difficult. The crowd parted for her. "Someone tagged me, said my father was making a veteran perform on the street like a circus animal. That's not I was helping him. Were you?" Ashley stopped in front of Tom, up close. He could see more scars, burn marks on her neck, her hands. "You're Tom Sullivan." "Yes, ma'am." Army Sergeant Thomas Sullivan, 3 tours in Afghanistan, Silver Star, Purple Heart. She looked at Sergeant, and something in her expression broke. And that's Sergeant. The dog's tail wagged weakly, as if recognizing something familiar. Ashley lowered herself carefully to her knees, crutches clattering to the sidewalk. She reached out a shaking hand to Sergeant, who sniffed it, then licked her fingers. A sob escaped her throat. "I know you," she whispered to the dog. "You found the IED before I stepped on it. You saved my life." The crowd had gone completely silent, but Eleanor moved closer, helping steady Ashley. Tom knelt too, one hand on Sergeant's back. "I heard they put you down," Ashley continued, tears streaming down her scarred face. "After I got medevaced out, someone told me you were too traumatized to work anymore, that they'd retired you." She looked up at Tom. "But you saved him. He was David Sullivan's dog. David died in my arms. He asked me to protect Sergeant, so I did." Ashley turned to her father, still kneeling in the snow. "You knew. I told you about this dog. I told you I wanted to find him, to adopt him. And you said—" her voice hardened. "You said it was better to let go, to move forward. That dwelling on the past wouldn't help my recovery." "Ashley, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." She struggled to her feet, Eleanor and Tom helping her up. "You were embarrassed. Your daughter came home broken, and you couldn't stand it. So you hid me, made me stay in that house, away from everyone, because God forbid anyone see that Richard Montgomery's daughter isn't perfect anymore. I was protecting you. You were protecting yourself." Ashley's voice echoed off the buildings. "Just like you're protecting yourself now, making this man, this veteran who saved lives, who kept his promises even when it cost him everything, making him perform for your entertainment, because it makes you feel powerful, because, for once, you get to be the one looking down at Tom Sullivan instead of the other way around." Richard's face had gone from pale to red. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Tom saved me," Ashley said flatly. "Sergeant saved me, and you tried to humiliate them both." She turned to the crowd, to the phones still recording. "My father is worth $2 billion. This veteran is homeless. His dog is dying because he can't afford surgery. And instead of helping, my father made him sing for $500. Someone in the crowd gasped. Others pulled out their phones, typing frantically. Eleanor's voice cut through the murmurs. $500 for a dog that needs cancer surgery. $250,000, Tom said quietly. "That's what it would cost. I have $47. The number seemed to hit the crowd like a physical blow. An older woman put her hand to her mouth. A man in an expensive suit looked down at his shoes. Several people were already on their phones, pulling up donation sites. Richard stood isolated, everyone's attention on him now, not with admiration or respect, but with disgust. "I didn't know about the dog, he said weakly. "I didn't know about any of this." "You didn't want to know," Eleanor said. "That's the problem. You didn't want to know whose lives your policies destroyed, whose claims you denied, because as long as they were just numbers on a spreadsheet, you could sleep at night." Richard opened his mouth to respond, but his phone rang, then someone else's phone, then a chorus of notification sounds as the story went viral, spreading across social media in real time. The hotel manager emerged from the entrance, face apologetic but firm. Mr. Montgomery, I'm afraid we're going to have to ask you to leave. The board has decided your presence here is inappropriate given the circumstances. Richard stared at the manager, then at the crowd, then at Tom. For a moment, something like genuine emotion crossed his face, shame, maybe, or regret. But it passed quickly, replaced by anger. This is ridiculous. I'm being condemned for a business decision. You're being condemned for being cruel, Eleanor said simply. There's a difference. Richard turned and walked toward his Bentley, the crowd parting silently. No one tried to stop him. No one needed to. The damage was done, recorded, and already spreading to millions of screens. As his car pulled away, Sargent coughed a wet, rattling sound that seemed to break the spell. Tom gathered the dog into his arms, feeling how much weight Sargent had lost, how fragile he'd become. Eleanor put her hand on Tom's shoulder. How long does he have? Without surgery, 3 months, maybe less. Then we'd better get started. She pulled out her phone again. I'm calling my veterinarian. And then we're setting up a proper fundraiser, not $500, the full amount, Ashley added. I'll match the first 100,000. It's the least I can do. Around them, people were already pledging money, pulling out wallets, typing into their phones. The viral video had grown beyond just Richard's humiliation. It had become something else. A story of loyalty, of sacrifice, of promises kept. Tom couldn't speak, could only hold Sargent and watch as the world decided, finally, to help. The veterinary hospital smelled of antiseptic and hope. Tom sat in the waiting room at 3 a.m, Eleanor on one side, Ashley on the other. Sargent had been in surgery for 4 hours. Patricia White had insisted on performing the operation herself, refusing payment despite the fundraiser. David Sullivan's dog, she'd said. When Eleanor called, I'll be there in 20 minutes. The GoFundMe had hit $50,000 within the first hour. By midnight, it had passed 200,000. Tom had watched the number climb on Ashley's phone, unable to process what he was seeing. Strangers from across the country, across the world, giving $5, $50, $500. Each donation came with a message for all the good boys who protect us. My father was a Marine. Thank you for your service. Dogs are family, period. The waiting room television played news coverage on mute. Tom's face filled the screen, a screenshot from the viral video. Tears on his cheeks. Sargent's paw on his thigh. The Chiron read, Billionaire's cruelty exposes veteran healthcare crisis. You should try to sleep, Eleanor said gently. Tom shook his head. He'd slept through Sarah's last hours, dozed off in the hospital chair. Exhausted from days of vigil, when he woke, she was gone. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Ashley shifted in her seat, adjusting her prosthetic. Can I ask you something? Of course. That day, the day Sargent found the IED, do you remember it? Tom closed his eyes, pulling up the memory. You were on patrol with 3rd Platoon. Sargent alerted 50 meters from the compound entrance. Sat down, wouldn't move. Your squad leader wanted to keep going, said the dog was probably just tired. But you intervened. David radioed me. Said Sargent never false alarmed. I pulled rank, ordered the area evacuated. Tom opened his eyes. OD found 3 daisy-chained IEDs. They were waiting for a full squad to walk over them. 14 of us, Ashley whispered. There were 14 people in that patrol. Sergeant had saved all of us. She wiped her eyes. 2 weeks later, I wasn't so lucky. Different road, different dog. That handler missed the signs. Eleanor took Ashley's hand. The two women had bonded quickly over the past hours, connected by the invisible thread of military loss, one who'd lost a son, one who'd nearly lost herself. Richard doesn't know any of this, Ashley continued. When I came home, he saw the scars in the leg and decided I was broken. He moved me into the house in Brookline, hired private nurses, told everyone I was recovering abroad. He was ashamed of me. That's not love, Eleanor said firmly. Love doesn't hide. It shows up. It stays. Tom thought about Sargent in the operating room, thought about all the times the dog had stayed when Tom was trapped in nightmares, when he was drunk on despair, when he had nothing to offer but his presence. Sargent had never left, had never even considered it. The surgery doors opened. Dwight emerged, still in scrubs, surgical mask pulled down. Her face was exhausted, but smiling. Tom stood so fast he nearly fell. Is he? He made it through surgery. We removed the tumor and a portion of the affected lung. The margins look clean, but we'll need pathology to confirm. She pulled off her surgical cap, gray hair plastered to her forehead. He's strong, stronger than most dogs his age. That saved his life. Tom's knees buckled. Ashley caught his arm, kept him upright. Can I see him? He's in recovery, still sedated. But yes, come with me. They followed her through sterile corridors to a room lined with kennels. Sargent lay on a warming blanket of wool in his leg, bandages wrapped around his chest. A tube protruded from between the bandages, a chest drain, Dwight explained, to remove fluid. He looked small, vulnerable, nothing like the war dog who'd faced down insurgents without flinching. Tom knelt beside the kennel, reaching through the bars to touch Sargent's paw. The fur was soft, one alive. Hey, boy, Tom whispered. You made it, you tough old bastard. You made it. Sargent's eyes fluttered but didn't open. The anesthesia still held him. Tom stayed there, hand on the dog's paw, while Dr. White explained the recovery timeline, 2 weeks in the hospital, then 6 weeks of restricted activity. Chemotherapy would start in a month, 3 sessions over 3 months. The prognosis, Eleanor asked. With treatment, 70% chance of 2-year survival, maybe more. Dwight looked at Tom. You gave him that chance. By keeping him alive this long, by not giving up. A lot of people would have chosen euthanasia. That wasn't a choice, Tom said simply. I made a promise. They left Tom alone with Sargent. He sat on the floor beside the kennel, back against the wall, hand still touching the dog's paw through the gus. Time became fluid. Minutes or hours passed, he couldn't tell. His phone buzzed, 3% battery. The notification reminded him he'd forgotten to charge it for days. Tom opened the video. Sarah's face filled the screen, gaunt and pale but smiling, her voice thin as tissue paper. Take care of Sargent. He'll take care of you. I did, Tom told the phone. Told Sarah's ghost I kept my promise. The video ended. 2% battery. A sound from the kennel sergeant shifting, making a small whining noise. Tom looked up to find the dog's eyes open, clouded with drugs but aware. Sergeant saw Tom and his whole tail moved. Just once. A weak wag that said, You're here. That's all I needed. I'm here, Tom confirmed, voice breaking. I'm not going anywhere. Sargent's eyes closed again, but his breathing had changed, steadier, calmer, as if knowing Tom was there was enough to let him rest. The door opened quietly. Eleanor entered carrying coffee and a sandwich. Ashley went home to rest. She'll be back in the morning. She handed Tom the coffee, sat down beside him. You should eat. Tom took the coffee, but couldn't imagine eating. Thank you for everything. I don't know how to... You held my son when he died. You kept his guitar safe for 5 years. You honored his last wish, even when it cost you everything. Eleanor's eyes were wet. I'll never be able to repay that. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything. She gestured to Sargent. And so does Ashley. And apparently, so do about 50,000 people on the internet. Tom looked at his phone again. 1% battery. He thought about all the weight that phone carried: Sarah's voice, David's memory, the last connections to people he'd loved and lost. I should let you charge that, Eleanor said, noticing, but Tom shook his head. He opened his photos, found the video, and pressed delete. The phone asked him to confirm. His finger hovered over the button. Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. He'll take care of you. She'd been right. Sargent had taken care of him. Through the nightmares, through the grief, through 18 months of winter streets, the dog had been Sarah's final gift, her way of making sure Tom didn't face the darkness alone. Tom confirmed the deletion. The video vanished. What did you just do? Eleanor asked, concerned. I let go. Tom said quietly, Sarah told me to take care of Sargent because she knew he'd take care of me. And he did. But I was holding onto that video like a lifeline, terrified of losing her voice. I was so focused on what I'd lost that I couldn't see what I still had. He looked at Sargent, breathing steadily in the kennel, looked at Eleanor, who'd become family in a single night, thought about Ashley, about Dwight, about thousands of strangers who'd chosen kindness. I have so much, Tom said, wonder in his voice. I have so much. Eleanor put her arm around his shoulders. They sat together in the quiet hum of the veterinary hospital, keeping vigil over a dog who'd saved lives and been saved in return. Outside, dawn was breaking over Boston. The first light touched the windows, soft and gold, promising warmth after the longest winter Tom had ever known. His phone died with a soft chime. Tom didn't notice. He didn't need it anymore. He had everything that mattered right here. 6 months later, Boston. Common bloomed with summer green. Tom sat on a blanket in the shade of an old oak tree, watching Sargent chase a tennis ball across the grass. The dog's coat had filled out, glossy and thick. His gait showed only the slightest hitch where they'd removed part of his lung. The chemotherapy had ended 2 weeks ago. Dr. White called him her miracle patient. He's faster than he was before surgery. Ashley observed, sitting beside Tom. She'd ditched the crutches for a cane, and recently she'd been leaving even that behind for short distances. He knows he's supposed to be dead, Tom said. Makes him appreciate the running more. Eleanor arrived carrying a picnic basket, her late husband's Red Sox cap shading her face. She'd aged backward over the past months. Or maybe Tom had just learned to see past grief to the person underneath. She spread out containers of sandwiches, fruit, cookies she'd baked that morning. "Is Richard coming?" Tom asked. "He said he'd try." Eleanor's voice was carefully neutral. The relationship between Richard and the rest of them remained complicated, delicate as new ice. Tom had moved into Eleanor's guest house in March. The main house was too big for her alone. She'd insisted, and the guest house was just sitting empty. Tom suspected she'd invented the loneliness to give him a dignified way to accept help, but he'd accept it anyway. Pride was a luxury he'd learned to live without. The Veterans Organization had hired him in April as an outreach coordinator. His job was simple: find homeless veterans, connect them with resources, be living proof that the system could work if enough people cared. Sergeant came with him on every call, a therapy dog now officially certified. Turned out a dog who'd survived war and cancer was exactly what broken people needed to see. "Tell me the story again," Ashley said, throwing the ball for Sergeant. "About the first time you realized things were going to be okay." Tom smiled. They'd heard this story before, but Ashley liked to hear it repeated, the way children ask for favorite books. "It was the third day after surgery. Sergeant woke up and saw me, and his tail wagged so hard he pulled out his IV to white band me from the recovery room after that." Tom watched Sergeant bound back with the ball, no sign of the cancer that had nearly killed him. "But that wag, that was when I knew he wasn't done fighting." "Neither were you," Eleanor added. The fundraiser had topped $400,000 before they'd closed it. After Sergeant's surgery and treatment, they'd used the remainder to establish the David Sullivan Fund, providing medical care for retired military working dogs. 12 dogs had been treated so far. 3 more were waiting. Ashley's advocacy work had taken off, too. She'd testified before Congress about veteran health care. The footage of her confronting Richard spliced into her testimony about invisible wounds and visible scars. 2 representatives had introduced legislation. It wouldn't pass this session, probably wouldn't pass for years, but seeds had been planted. "Here he comes," Eleanor said quietly. Richard walked across the common, dressed in jeans and a polo shirt, the most casual Tom had ever seen him. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The news had been brutal. Board votes, shareholder lawsuits, criminal investigations into Montgomery Health Solutions denial practices. Richard had resigned from everything, sold most of his holdings. The fortune wasn't gone, but it was significantly reduced. More importantly, the man had been reduced. "Sorry I'm late," Richard said, hovering at the edge of the blanket. "Traffic was—" "Sit down, Dad," Ashley said, not unkindly. "Richard, Dad." Movement stiff with discomfort, Sergeant trotted over, ball in mouth, and dropped it at Richard's feet. The dog looked up expectantly. "He wants you to throw it," Tom explained. Richard picked up the ball gingerly, threw it. His form was terrible. The ball barely went 20 feet, but Sergeant chased it enthusiastically anyway. "He's looking good," Richard offered. "He is." Tom accepted the olive branch. They were all trying, in their own ways, to build something from the wreckage. Richard had started therapy, real therapy, not the executive coaching kind. He'd moved into a modest condo in Cambridge, spent his days volunteering at the VA hospital. He was learning, slowly and painfully, how to be human instead of successful. "I talked to my lawyer," Richard said, addressing Tom directly, "about your discharge status. There's precedent for appealing general discharges. especially in cases involving service animals. If we can prove Sargent was being unlawfully retired, we might be able to get your discharge upgraded, restore your benefits. Tom had thought about this. The pension would mean security, health care, a foundation to build on. But something in him hesitated. Why? He asked. Why does it matter to you? Richard was quiet for a long moment. Sargent returned with the ball, and this time Richard's throw was better, straighter. The dog bounded after it joyfully. Because I spent 30 years proving I was better than that scared kid in the locker room. Richard finally said, better than you. Better than everyone who'd ever looked down on me. And in doing that, I became something worse than scared. I became cruel. He looked at Tom. You saved me twice. Once when we were kids, and once that night on the street. The second time, you saved me from myself. I was just trying to save my dog. I know. That's what made it matter. Richard's voice was thick. You weren't trying to teach me a lesson or humiliate me. You were just trying to keep a promise to a dead soldier and a dying dog. And somehow that was enough to show me everything I'd become. Eleanor handed out sandwiches, a deliberate change of subject. They ate in the dappled shade, watching as Sargent patrolled the perimeter of their gathering. Still a guardian, even in retirement. Tom's phone buzzed the new one Eleanor had insisted on buying him. A text from Dart White pathology results final. No cancer detected. Sargent is officially in remission. Tom showed the screen to the group. Ashley whooped. Eleanor clasped her hands together. Richard's eyes went wet. He made it, Tom said, voice wondering. He really made it. Sargent, hearing his name, trotted over and collapsed across Tom's lap, tongue lolling, completely content. Tom ran his hands through the thick fur, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath. Can I ask you something? Richard said. That night, after everything, you could have destroyed me. The video, the media attention, you could have pushed for criminal charges, lawsuits, everything. But you didn't. Why? Tom thought about Sarah, about David, about all the rage he'd carried like stones in his pockets. Thought about the moment he deleted Sarah's video, choosing to move forward instead of backward. Because Sargent taught me something, Tom said slowly. Dogs don't hold grudges. They don't keep score. They just love. And they trust that love is enough. I figured if a dog could do that after everything he'd been through, maybe I could too. Richard nodded, unable to speak. They finished lunch as the afternoon heat bit and was built. Ashley and Eleanor started gathering containers, debating whose house to reconvene at for dinner. Richard helped pack up, his movements uncertain but sincere. Tom stayed on the blanket with Sargent sprawled beside him, watching the city move around them. Runners passed, children played, couples walked hand in hand, life continuing in all its messy, beautiful complexity. You did good, boy, Tom whispered to Sargent. You saved me. You know that. Sargent's tail thumped twice against the grass. His eyes were closed, face tilted toward the sun, soaking in warmth after too many cold nights. Tom closed his own eyes, feeling that same warmth. He thought about the journey from that frozen sidewalk to this summer grass, from despair to something like peace. It hadn't been quick, it hadn't been easy, but they'd made it together. When he opened his eyes, Eleanor was offering her hand to help him up. Ready? She asked. Tom looked at Sergeant, who was watching him with those steady brown eyes. Always watching, always ready. Yeah, Tom said, taking her hand. We're ready. Some people think loyalty died with the old days, that promises don't mean what they used to, that when life gets hard, you're supposed to look out for yourself first. But then you see a man sleeping in the snow to keep his dog warm. You see a dog who stays beside his person even when there's no food, no shelter, no reason to hope, and you remember loyalty isn't dead. It's just rare enough now that when you find it, it takes your breath away. Tom and Sergeant taught us something our generation already knows, but sometimes forgets. Love isn't about what you have. It's about what you're willing to give up. It's about showing up when showing up is the hardest thing in the world. It's about keeping promises, even when no one would blame you for breaking them. We've all lost people. We've all faced winters that felt endless. We've all wondered if staying loyal to our values, our loved ones, our word, if it's worth the cost. Tom wondered that too. Standing in the cold with $500 that couldn't save the dog who'd saved him. But here's what he learned. What Sergeant showed him: you don't measure life by how much you accumulate. You measure it by who stays, by who you stay for, by the promises you keep when keeping them costs everything. Sergeant didn't care that Tom was homeless, didn't care about money or status or success. He cared that Tom was there, and that was enough. Maybe that's the lesson for all of us. In a world that tells us we're only as valuable as our bank accounts, our achievements, our Instagram followers, maybe the truth is simpler. Maybe we're valuable because we choose to stay, because we choose to love, because we keep our promises even when it would be easier not to. Tom kept his promise to David. Sergeant kept his promise to Tom, and in the end, that loyalty saved them both. What promises are you still keeping? Who stayed with you when times got hard? Share your story in the comments below. Let's remind each other that loyalty and love still matter, that they've always mattered, that they always will.